Imagine living in a world where the clothes you wore, the food you ate, and even the way you celebrated holidays were dictated not by personal choice, but by royal decree. That was everyday life in the Middle Ages, where kings and queens wielded power in ways that would seem unthinkable today. Some of their laws were practical, others downright bizarre. But what's truly fascinating is how these rulings, often made on a whim, ended up shaping society in ways no one could have predicted. From regulating sleeve lengths to banning certain spices, these decrees didn't just reflect the quirks of medieval rulers. They accidentally rewrote the rules of daily life for generations. Picture this: a king, frustrated by the extravagance of his nobles, decides to limit how much fabric they can use in their clothing. What sounds like a simple act of control spirals into a fashion revolution, altering styles across an entire continent. Or consider a queen who, worried about food shortages, bans a popular ingredient only to spark a culinary trend that lasts for centuries. These weren't just random edicts, they were moments where royal whims collided with everyday life, leaving behind legacies that still echo in surprising ways today. So why do these strange laws matter? Because they reveal how deeply power and culture were intertwined in the Middle Ages. A single decree could redefine social norms, influence trade routes, or even change how people marked time. Some of these rules were so oddly specific, you'll wonder what the rulers were thinking, while others had consequences so far-reaching, they feel almost prophetic. Over the next 23 stories, we'll uncover the accidental genius, the hilarious misfires, and the unexpected turning points hidden in these medieval mandates. Get ready to see history in a whole new light, one royal decree at a time. In medieval Europe, a royal decree wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a force of nature. Kings and queens didn't just rule, they reshaped reality with a stroke of the pen. Their laws controlled who could wear silk, how much bread a baker could sell, even what games children were allowed to play. But behind every bizarre decree was a calculated move. Some rulers used these laws to reinforce social order, ensuring nobles didn't dress above their station or commoners didn't get too ambitious. Others saw them as tools to stabilize economies, like banning the export of grain during famines or setting fixed prices for ale to prevent price gouging. And then there were the personal quirks, rulers who outlawed foods they disliked or mandated holidays just because they enjoyed the festivities. What's fascinating is how these decrees often backfired in the most creative ways. A law meant to curb extravagance might inspire secret fashion trends among the nobility, who found loopholes to flaunt their wealth. An edict restricting certain trades could accidentally birth new industries as people adapted to the rules. Even punishments had unintended consequences. Banning a popular festival might lead to underground celebrations that grew even wilder than the original. These laws weren't just about control, they were experiments in social engineering with results no one could fully predict. The real power of these decrees lay in their ripple effects. A king's obsession with clean streets could lead to the first public sanitation systems. A queen's decree on fair wages might set precedents for workers' rights centuries later. And sometimes the most arbitrary rules, like banning pointy shoes or regulating beard length, revealed the anxieties of an era, mirroring fears about morality, class, or even foreign influence. Every decree was a snapshot of its time, capturing the priorities, prejudices, and peculiarities of medieval life. So when we laugh at these old laws today, we're not just mocking the past, we're seeing how power, when wielded carelessly, can twist society into shapes no one expected. King Edward III's sumptuary laws might sound like medieval snobbery, but they reveal a desperate attempt to control a society in flux. In the 1300s, Europe was recovering from the Black Death, which had wiped out nearly half the population. Suddenly, surviving peasants found themselves in high demand for labor, and with higher wages came newfound spending power. For the first time, a farmer's wife might afford a silk ribbon, or a blacksmith could buy fur-lined gloves. This terrified the nobility. If commoners could dress like aristocrats, how would anyone know who was truly in charge? So Edward's decree drew a sartorial line in the sand: silk, ermine, and gold embroidery for lords and ladies, coarse wool and undyed linen for everyone else. But humans have always found ways to bend the rules. Enter the garb smugglers, clever merchants who sold forbidden fabrics under the counter, often disguising silk as humble linen by dyeing it dull colors. Underground tailors flourished, stitching hidden luxuries into garments, a fur lining concealed beneath a plain outer layer, or gold thread woven discreetly into hems. Authorities raided markets and even burned confiscated finery, but the demand only grew. In fact, these laws had the opposite effect. By making fancy clothes illegal, they made them even more desirable. Suddenly, fashion became a silent protest, a way for ambitious commoners to declare, "I matter too." The most surprising legacy: these failed laws helped shape modern consumer culture. When people couldn't flaunt wealth through clothing, they turned to other status symbols: elaborate hairstyles, imported spices, even ornate furniture. The decree accidentally diversified luxury markets, proving that you can't legislate human aspiration. And ironically, by trying to freeze fashion in place, Edward III unleashed creativity. Tailors began inventing new cuts and styles to skirt the rules, laying the groundwork for the rapid fashion evolution we see today. So the next time you see someone bending a dress code, remember they're part of a 700-year-old tradition of stylish rebellion. Imagine a time when the price of your daily bread wasn't set by supply and demand but by royal decree. In 1266, England's King Henry III faced a crisis. Grain harvests were failing, prices were skyrocketing, and hungry crowds teetered on the edge of revolt. His solution: the assize of bread and ale, one of history's first attempts at government price controls. This law didn't just fix bread prices, it tied them directly to the cost of grain, ensuring a loaf would always be affordable even in lean years. On paper, it was a stroke of genius, a way to keep the peace by guaranteeing no one would starve because they couldn't afford a basic staple. But as with many well-intentioned laws, human ingenuity quickly found ways to twist the system. Bakers, forced to sell at fixed prices, discovered they could still turn a profit by shrinking their loaves. A clever workaround, until customers noticed their pound bread now weighed barely 12 ounces. The backlash was swift. Authorities began spot-checking bakeries with scales, and punishments ranged from fines to the dreaded pillory, where dishonest bakers endured public humiliation with their underweight loaves hung around their necks. This cat-and-mouse game led to something revolutionary: standardized weights. For the first time, bread had to meet exact size requirements, creating consistency we now take for granted in every supermarket aisle. But the law's true legacy runs deeper. Those early attempts at consumer protection planted seeds for modern food safety regulations. Inspectors began monitoring not just weight but quality, banning sawdust or chalk as cheap flour substitutes. The assize also recognized bread's social importance by setting different price tiers: expensive white bread for the wealthy, coarse brown loaves for laborers. This accidental class system in baking still echoes today in our multigrain aisles and artisanal bakeries. Most remarkably, these medieval rules established a principle we still rely on: that essential food shouldn't be left entirely to market forces. 7 centuries later, that fragile balance between fair pricing and honest trade remains as relevant as ever. Sunday afternoons in medieval England weren't for relaxation, they were for war preparation. In 1363, King Edward III issued a decree that would reshape English society. Every able-bodied man had to spend his day off honing his archery skills, with football and other games strictly forbidden. This wasn't just about keeping citizens busy, it was a calculated move to turn an entire population into a reserve army. The longbow, a weapon so powerful it could pierce armor at 200 yards, required years of practice to master. Edward knew that in a kingdom constantly threatened by France, a nation of trained archers would be his ultimate weapon. But no one could have predicted how profoundly this mandate would alter the course of history. The law's brilliance lay in its simplicity. Villages set up but earthen mounds for target practice, and towns hosted weekly competitions with prizes for the best shots. Fathers taught sons, neighbors became rivals, and what began as obligation soon turned into pride. Archery wasn't just a skill, it became part of English identity. By the time the 100 Years' War reached its climax, England had something no other nation could match. Tens of thousands of men who'd spent every Sunday since childhood pulling a 6-foot bow. When these part-time archers faced French knights at Agincourt in 1415, their arrows darkened the sky. Outnumbered and exhausted, they delivered one of history's most lopsided victories, proof that Edward's decree had turned a peasantry into a fighting force. Yet the ripple effects went far beyond the battlefield. The longbow mandate inadvertently reshaped English culture. Football, seen as a distraction from archery, was driven underground, ironically making it a symbol of rebellion for centuries. Meanwhile, the focus on marksmanship fostered innovations in bow design and arrow production, boosting entire industries. Most remarkably, the decree blurred class lines. On the archery range, a farmer could outshoot a nobleman, challenging medieval hierarchies in ways no law intended. Edward's vision of military readiness became something far greater, a lesson in how consistent practice, woven into daily life, can transform ordinary people into extraordinary forces. Today's sports drills and military reserves owe an unexpected debt to those Sunday afternoon target sessions 7 centuries ago. In the summer of 1516, Bavaria faced a crisis that had nothing to do with wars or plagues. It was about beer. Duke Wilhelm IV, alarmed by brewers using questionable ingredients like soot or hallucinogenic herbs to cut costs, issued a decree that would become legendary, the Rhinehatesjibat, or beer purity law. On its surface, the rule was simple: only water, barley, and hops could be used in brewing. But this wasn't just about quality control, it was an economic masterstroke. By banning wheat, the Duke ensured bakers had enough grain for bread during shortages, and by standardizing recipes, he prevented shady brewers from exploiting thirsty customers. What started as a practical solution, though, would grow into something far bigger than anyone imagined. At first, Bavarian brewers grumbled. The law limited creativity, banning spices, fruits, and other popular additives. But necessity bred innovation. With only 3 ingredients allowed, brewers perfected their craft through precision rather than experimentation. They discovered how different hop varieties could alter flavor, how water quality affected texture, and how fermentation times created distinct profiles. The Rhinehatesjibat didn't stifle brewing, it elevated it into an art form. By the 1800s, Bavarian beers had gained such renown that when Germany unified, the law went national. Suddenly, made in Germany meant something specific, a gold standard for beer worldwide. The law's unintended consequences were delicious. Because yeast wasn't mentioned in the original decree, microscopes hadn't yet revealed its role. Brewers guarded their fermentation secrets like treasure, leading to regional strains that gave beers unique characters. And by banning preservatives, the Rhinehatesjibat forced brewers to focus on freshness, paving the way for cold storage methods that revolutionized the industry. Today, while modern breweries occasionally bend the rules, the spirit of the law endures, a reminder that sometimes constraints spark brilliance. That humble 1516 decree didn't just protect Bavarians from bad beer, it gave the world a timeless lesson in how simplicity, when mastered, can become extraordinary. The toll of the curfew bell didn't just mark the end of the day, it rewrote the rhythm of human life. As darkness fell over medieval towns, watchmen would ring this nightly alarm, signaling not just bedtime but a critical safety measure. All hearth fires were to be covered or extinguished. In an era where a single spark could reduce tightly packed wooden cities to ash, this law was less about control and more about collective survival, yet its unintended side effect was far stranger. By plunging towns into darkness for hours, the curfew didn't just prevent fires, it fractured sleep itself, giving rise to a pattern modern scientists now call segmented sleep. Before artificial lighting, people naturally slept in two distinct blocks. After the curfew bell rang around 9 in the evening, families would retreat to bed for what they called first sleep, a deep rest lasting until midnight or so. Then came a mysterious waking interlude. Historical records describe this midnight hour as a time of quiet productivity. Neighbors chatting softly, scholars reading by candlelight, even bakers starting dough for the morning. Some towns permitted limited movement during this window, creating a surreal nighttime economy of whispered trades and moonlit visits. By 2 in the morning, the bell would often toll again, signaling second sleep until dawn. This biphasic rhythm wasn't imposed by law, but emerged naturally when darkness stretched uninterrupted for 12 hours, a rhythm our bodies still instinctively crave. The curfew's legacy lingers in surprising ways. Modern sleep studies show that when deprived of artificial light, humans revert to segmented sleep patterns, with a midnight waking period perfect for reflection or creativity. Those medieval midnight hours birthed some of history's most intimate moments: diary entries, philosophical musings, even inventions sketched by candlelight. The bell also reshaped urban design. Watchtowers built to monitor curfew compliance became early civic landmarks, while the nightly ritual of banking fires led to safer chimney designs. Most remarkably, this decree may hold the key to our modern struggle with insomnia. When historians examined pre-industrial sleep records, they found almost no accounts of sleeplessness, suggesting that by fighting the curfew's natural darkness, we've unwittingly disrupted a biological rhythm older than cities themselves. So the next time you wake at 3 in the morning, don't reach for a sleeping pill. You might be experiencing an echo of medieval life, a primal reminder that before streetlights and smartphones, humanity danced to a different, darker rhythm. That nightly bell didn't just keep towns safe, it gave the night back to dreamers, thinkers, and stargazers, proving that even the strictest laws can't fully govern the mysteries of the human mind after dark. King Henry VIII had a problem. His navy was weak and his coastal towns were struggling. His solution, a royal decree that would reshape English diets for centuries. In 1548, he mandated that all citizens eat fish every Friday and Saturday, a law that seemed simple on the surface but sent ripples through the economy, culture, and even global trade. At first glance, it was a clever way to bolster the fishing industry, ensuring a steady demand for seafood to support sailors and shipbuilders. But no one could have predicted how deeply this decree would embed itself into the fabric of everyday life. The immediate effect was dramatic. Fishmongers saw their sales double overnight, and coastal villages scrambled to expand their fleets. Suddenly, fishing wasn't just a trade, it was a national priority. Shipyards buzzed with activity as new vessels were built to meet the demand, inadvertently strengthening England's naval capacity. By the time the Spanish Armada threatened English shores decades later, the kingdom had a robust fishing industry that could quickly pivot to wartime ship production. Henry's dinner table decree had accidentally fortified his nation's defenses, but the law's cultural impact ran even deeper. With fish now a dietary staple, cooks across England got creative. They experimented with preservation techniques like smoking and salting, ensuring seafood could reach inland towns without spoiling. Markets sprouted along rivers and roads, creating new trade networks that connected coastal and rural communities. And then there were the unintended culinary consequences, like the rise of fish and chips. Originally a cheap meal for workers, this pairing became a national icon because of those forced fish days. The law lingered long after Henry's reign, weaving itself into British identity so thoroughly that even today, Friday fish dinners remain a tradition in pubs and homes across the country. Perhaps the most surprising legacy, though, was global. England's insatiable demand for fish pushed fishermen farther out to sea, leading to the discovery of rich fishing grounds off Newfoundland. These expeditions didn't just bring back cod, they mapped new routes that would later fuel the British Empire's expansion. A decree meant to feed a nation ended up feeding its ambitions, proving that even the most mundane laws can cast waves across oceans and centuries. So the next time you enjoy fish and chips, remember, you're tasting a bite of history seasoned by royal decree. Nothing says, "I'm important," quite like a towering feathered hat, and in 1630s England, that statement came with a tax bill. When King Charles II introduced a levy on men's headwear, it wasn't just about raising revenue, it was a clumsy attempt to curb the outrageous hat trends sweeping London's elite. The logic seemed sound: charge 5 shillings for every hat sold, and maybe nobles would think twice before sporting ostrich plumes and gold-threaded brims. But the king underestimated one thing: human pride. Instead of simplifying fashion, the tax turned hats into walking tax receipts, with aristocrats competing to wear the most extravagant designs just to prove they could afford the fines. The real genius emerged in the loopholes. Wealthy gentlemen discovered that stacking multiple hats counted as a single purchase, so why wear one when 3 would do? Portraits from the era show men balancing precarious hat towers, each layer more absurd than the last. Others took a different approach, buying cheap felt bases and attaching detachable luxuries, a silk lining one day, a jeweled brooch the next, technically owning just one taxable hat while changing its appearance daily. The law's wording even exempted ecclesiastical headgear, leading suspiciously pious-looking merchants to don bishop-style caps for market day. What began as a revenue scheme became a national game of sartorial cat and mouse. Beyond the absurdity lies a profound lesson about class and resistance. In an era when sumptuary laws dictated everything from shoe buckles to sleeve width, hats became a rare outlet for self-expression. A merchant might legally have to wear wool, but no law could stop him from topping it with a hat so lavish it silently mocked the nobility. The tax records themselves tell the story. Year after year, hat sales mysteriously declined while ribbon and feather merchants saw unprecedented profits. Authorities eventually abandoned the levy, but its legacy lingers in unexpected places. Modern dress codes, from school uniforms to corporate policies, still grapple with the same truth Charles II learned too late. You can tax a hat, but you can't tax away the human urge to stand tall, preferably under something extravagant. In the quiet villages of 14th century France, a royal decree targeted an unlikely culprit, the common house cat. Town officials, concerned about declining songbird populations, issued a law requiring all cats to be leashed during daylight hours. At first glance, it seemed reasonable. Fewer free-roaming felines would mean more birds to fill the air with song. But the lawmakers failed to consider one critical detail. Cats weren't just hunters of birds, they were the medieval world's most efficient rat control. Within months of the leash law's introduction, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Rodents, no longer kept in check by prowling cats, multiplied at an alarming rate. Grain stores were overrun, food supplies spoiled, and the telltale signs of plague-bearing fleas began appearing in homes and shops. What started as an attempt to protect wildlife quickly spiraled into a public health disaster. The law's swift repeal wasn't just an admission of failure, it was a desperate scramble to undo the damage before disease could take hold. Ironically, the very birds the decree aimed to save faced new threats as rats raided nests for eggs, proving that tampering with nature's balance had consequences no one foresaw. This bizarre episode offers more than just a historical footnote. It reveals how medieval societies grappled with ecological relationships they didn't fully understand. Without knowledge of food chains or pest control science, lawmakers often treated symptoms rather than causes. The cat leash debacle also highlights a timeless truth about regulation. The most well-intentioned rules can have cascading effects when they ignore interconnected systems. Today, as we debate wildlife management and urban ecosystems, this 700-year-old mistake serves as a cautionary tale. Sometimes, the solution to one problem has been quietly purring at our feet all along. In the sweltering summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg became a stage for one of history's strangest epidemics, not of disease but of dance. For weeks, dozens of citizens twirled, leaped, and collapsed from exhaustion, unable to stop themselves despite bleeding feet and broken bones. Authorities, convinced the chaos was caused by immoral revelry, issued a desperate decree. All music and dancing were banned, and the afflicted were ordered to pray for deliverance. What they didn't realize was that this dancing plague wasn't a moral failing. It was likely a mass psychogenic event, a physical manifestation of collective trauma in a population battered by famine, disease, and relentless hardship. The band's failure was spectacular. Instead of calming the dancers, it amplified their frenzy. Deprived of musicians, some began beating out rhythms on whatever they could find: barrels, pots, even their own chests. Others claimed to hear music no one else could, a phenomenon modern psychologists recognize as auditory hallucinations under extreme stress. The city's attempt to legislate away the crisis revealed a medieval worldview where physical and spiritual health were inseparable. Officials didn't just blame the dancers, they blamed the very idea of joy itself in troubled times. Churches organized exorcisms, while physicians prescribed bizarre remedies like tying patients to wheels and rolling them through town, anything to shake loose the madness. Yet within this tragedy lies a profound insight into medieval public health. Without germ theory or understanding of mental illness, authorities reached for the only tools they had: moral edicts and spiritual interventions. The dancing plague wasn't just a medical mystery, it was a mirror reflecting society's deepest fears about loss of control. When faced with the inexplicable, Strasbourg's leaders defaulted to a familiar playbook: regulate behavior, restrict pleasure, and reinforce piety. That their efforts failed so utterly forces us to ask, how many of history's epidemics were worsened by the very laws meant to cure them? The legacy of this bizarre decree lingers in unexpected ways. Modern researchers studying mass hysteria cite Strasbourg as an early example of how stress manifests physically in close-knit communities. The ban's unintended consequence, driving dancers into secrecy, also offers a cautionary tale about repressive responses to public health crises. Most hauntingly, the episode reminds us that throughout history, those who suffer are often blamed for their suffering. The dancers of Strasbourg weren't healed by decrees or discipline. They eventually collapsed from exhaustion, their bodies bearing silent witness to a truth we're still learning. Sometimes the cure begins not with control, but with compassion. In medieval England, death wasn't just a private loss, it was a meticulously choreographed social event, governed by laws as strict as those regulating weddings or coronations. Sumptuary decrees transformed funerals into a bizarre theater of class distinction, where the number of mourners, the length of the procession, and even the fabric of grief-stricken attire were dictated by royal mandate. A duke's widow might be required to wear imported black velvet for a full year, while a merchant's wife could only afford dyed wool for 6 weeks. These weren't suggestions, they were enforceable rules with fines for those who dared mourn above their station. The message was clear: in a society obsessed with hierarchy, not even sorrow could level the playing field. The spectacle extended beyond clothing. A 1430s London ordinance specified exactly how many torchbearers could accompany a coffin based on the deceased's rank: 12 for nobility, 4 for guild members, and just 1 for common laborers. This turned funeral processions into walking infographics of social stratification, where the length of your candlelit parade broadcast your status as plainly as a coat of arms. Wealthy families, eager to flout these restrictions, found loopholes by hiring professional mourners, actors paid to wail and rend their garments, artificially inflating the apparent grief for their betters. Churches became stages for competitive grieving, with aristocrats vying to outspend each other on tomb sculptures and alms distributions, all while the poor were buried in unmarked pits under cover of darkness. What began as a tool for social control left an indelible mark on modern mourning customs. The tradition of wearing black, a direct descendant of those medieval fabric laws, originally meant to display wealth through expensive dyes. The concept of funeral processions with pallbearers, a watered-down version of those rank-specific parades, even our expectation that grief should follow strict timelines, appropriate periods for mourning, echoes those old sumptuary calendars. The most haunting legacy, though, is how these decrees commodified sorrow, turning intimate loss into public performance. Today, as social media transforms grief into curated content, we're still grappling with the same question those medieval laws posed: who gets to decide how we mourn and who profits from the spectacle? You wouldn't think a tax collector could influence the holes in your cheese, but in medieval Switzerland, that's exactly what happened. Faced with a levy on each wheel of cheese produced, resourceful alpine farmers found a delicious loophole. If the tax was based on quantity rather than weight, why not make smaller, denser cheeses? The result was a dairy revolution that gave us some of the world's most iconic varieties, proving that even bureaucracy can have a tasty silver lining. The math was simple but brilliant. A traditional large wheel might weigh 80 pounds, while a compact version could pack the same amount of milk into half the size. Farmers began pressing their curds tighter, aging them longer, and experimenting with techniques to concentrate flavor. Enter Emmental with its distinctive holes, not just a quirk of fermentation, but a side effect of this densification process. As gases expanded in the compressed cheese, they created those characteristic voids, turning a tax dodge into a trademark. Other regions followed suit, producing hard, long-lasting cheeses like Gruyere that could survive transport to distant markets without spoiling. What started as a fiscal workaround became a cornerstone of Swiss identity. But the cheese tax's ripple effects went beyond the dairy cellar. Smaller cheeses meant more frequent production cycles, which required precise record-keeping, an early form of quality control. Towns began stamping their cheeses with official seals to prove taxes had been paid, inadvertently creating Europe's first protected food origins. The system was so effective that fraudsters would carve fake stamps, leading to counterfeiting laws that predate modern trademark battles. Even the famous Swiss neutrality played a role, with warring neighbors constantly disrupting trade routes. These durable, tax-optimized cheeses became a reliable export that could weather political storms. The most surprising legacy, those medieval tax codes shaped modern food science. The need for consistent cheese density led to standardized measurements of milk fat content, while the focus on longevity spurred innovations in aging caves and humidity control. Today, when you slice into a wedge of Appenzeller or admire the perfect holes in a Swiss sandwich, you're tasting the ingenuity of farmers who turned financial pressure into culinary art. It's a reminder that some of history's most enduring innovations weren't born in laboratories or palaces, but in the quiet rebellion of ordinary people, one carefully calculated cheese wheel at a time. 12th Decree, the window tax light and privacy redefined in 1696. England introduced a tax so bizarre it literally walled out the sun. The window tax wasn't just another levy, it transformed homes into dim, airless boxes and rewrote the rules of architecture. The logic seemed straightforward. Tax houses based on the number of windows, assuming more windows meant greater wealth. But the unintended consequences were staggering. Landlords, eager to reduce their bills, began sealing up openings with bricks and mortar, plunging tenant homes into perpetual twilight. Within decades, entire neighborhoods resembled fortresses, their facades pockmarked with ghostly outlines where windows once shone. The human cost was devastating. In cramped urban tenements, sealed windows meant stifling air, rampant dampness, and the rapid spread of disease. Doctors reported skyrocketing cases of rickets, a vitamin D deficiency caused by lack of sunlight, while respiratory illnesses flourished in the stagnant air. But the most insidious effect was psychological. Families living in darkened rooms described a creeping sense of isolation, cut off from the rhythm of daylight and street life. The tax didn't just steal light, it redefined what it meant to feel at home. Architects responded with dark ingenuity, false windows, painted shutters or decorative brickwork mimicking real openings became a status symbol, allowing homeowners to feign wealth without the tax burden. This birthed an entire aesthetic movement, with symmetrical but blind window designs dominating Georgian townhouses. Even today, walking through London's older districts, you can spot these architectural lies, perfectly balanced facades where every third window is solid wall. The tax also accelerated the popularity of interior courtyards and skylights, workarounds that brought light in without adding taxable exterior openings. The law's legacy extends far beyond bricked-up windows, modern building codes guaranteeing minimum natural light, indirect descendants of the backlash against this oppressive tax. The very concept of a right to light in property law traces back to legal battles sparked by the window tax's excesses, and in a twist of historical irony, the tax ultimately collapsed under its own weight. As health reformers exposed its role in disease outbreaks, public outrage forced its repeal in 1851. But its ghost lingers in our language. When we say someone is in the dark or kept in the shadows, we're echoing an era when light itself was rationed by royal decree. Perhaps the most lasting lesson lies in how easily policy can reshape our most intimate spaces. A tax meant to target the wealthy ended up punishing the poor, a reminder that laws, no matter how well-intentioned, ripple through society in unpredictable ways. Those bricked-up windows weren't just architectural quirks. They were silent protests against a system that valued revenue over well-being. Today, as we debate privacy, urban design, and equitable housing, the window tax stands as a cautionary tale. When lawmakers tinker with the places we live, they're not just changing buildings, they're reshaping lives, one bricked-up window at a time. When Peter I of Russia returned from his European tour in 1698, he didn't just bring back new shipbuilding techniques and Enlightenment ideas, he brought back a razor. The Tsar, determined to drag Russia into modernity, saw beards as symbols of backwardness, relics of the old Muscovite ways he was desperate to shed. His solution was as bold as it was bizarre: a beard tax enforced with metal tokens stamped beard money that every whiskered man had to carry as proof of payment. For the nobility, the choice was stark shave like a European or pay up like a peasant. But what began as a forced fashion statement quickly became a battlefield for cultural identity. The tax's mechanics were ruthlessly efficient. Government inspectors patrolled cities, demanding to see beard tokens from any man with facial hair. Nobles paid 50 rubles annually, a staggering sum, while merchants and townsfolk paid less but still faced steep penalties for non-compliance. The only exemptions, priests and peasants, groups Peter deemed either too sacred or too insignificant to bother with. Overnight, beards transformed from personal grooming choices into political allegiances. To wear one was to reject Peter's vision of progress. To shave was to betray centuries of tradition linking beards to orthodox piety and masculine honor. The Tsar's own court became a surreal mix of clean-shaven diplomats and holdout boyars who chose to pay rather than conform, their bearded faces functioning as silent protests. Enterprising Russians soon found ways to rebel without openly defying the law. Fake beards became a thriving black market commodity, with merchants selling horsehair contraptions that clipped over the chin like theatrical props. Some wore them only at home, preserving their dignity in private while complying in public. Others flaunted their fakes at court, taunting the Tsar with exaggerated, comically large beards that mocked the very idea of regulating personal appearance. The most daring rebels took a different approach. They paid the tax but wore their beards with ostentatious pride, turning what was meant to be a mark of shame into a badge of honor. Beyond the absurdity lies a profound cultural shift. Peter's decree didn't just change Russian faces, it redefined masculinity and power. The traditional long beard, once a sign of wisdom and authority, became associated with stubbornness, while smooth chins signaled sophistication. This sartorial revolution even infiltrated art icons depicting saints, began showing them clean-shaven, a theological compromise that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. The tax lingered until 1772, but its legacy endured long after. Modern Russia's ambivalence toward Western influence, the tension between embracing progress and preserving tradition, can trace its roots to those early battles over facial hair. The beard tax's most lasting impact, though, might be its cautionary tale about reform. Peter succeeded in making Russia look more European, but at the cost of deepening social divides. His heavy-handed approach sparked resistance that hardened into cultural stubbornness, proving that even the most well-intentioned modernization can backfire when it dismisses the symbols people hold dear. Today, as governments still grapple with how to legislate personal expression from burqa bans to tattoo regulations, the lesson of the beard tax remains razor-sharp. You can tax a man's face, but you can't shave away his identity. In the rolling countryside of medieval Germany, a peasant's field wasn't just a source of food, it was a potential crime scene. Royal decrees declared all geese property of the nobility, turning every wandering bird into a test of obedience. Harming one, even to protect crops, could mean hefty fines or worse. But where laws create obstacles, ingenuity finds a way. Faced with flocks trampling their barley and peas, resourceful farmers devised a clever workaround, the world's first non-lethal goose defense system. Enter the goose herding dog, a specialized breed trained to nudge, corral, and shoo without leaving so much as a feather out of place. These canines weren't just pets, they were finely tuned legal loopholes on four legs. With careful breeding and training, they mastered the art of gentle intimidation, using barks and body language to steer geese back toward noble estates. Some even learned to recognize individual birds, knowing which belonged to which lord by subtle markings on their collars. What began as survival strategy blossomed into an unexpected profession, with skilled goose dogs commanding high prices in village markets. The ripple effects of this quirky law stretch far beyond medieval pastures. Those early herding techniques laid groundwork for modern livestock management, proving that animals could be guided without force. The selective breeding of these dogs likely contributed to lineages we now recognize as shepherd breeds. Even the concept of wildlife protection finds an odd precedent here. While the law served aristocratic interests, it inadvertently fostered an ethic of coexistence between humans and animals. But the most enduring legacy might be psychological. For peasants living under strict feudal control, outsmarting the goose law became a rare victory, a way to reclaim agency without overt defiance. Every time a dog redirected a greedy gander without touching it, it wasn't just crops being protected, it was dignity. That quiet resistance echoes in rural communities to this day, where clever problem-solving remains the ultimate answer to unreasonable rules. So the next time you see a border collie expertly managing a flock, remember, its ancestors weren't just herding sheep, they were navigating the fine print of medieval law, one unharmed goose at a time. In the flickering glow of medieval churches, a battle over candle wax revealed just how deeply faith and finance were intertwined. When religious authorities decreed that only pure beeswax candles could grace altars, banning the smoky, foul-smelling tallow made from animal fat, they weren't just making an aesthetic choice. This seemingly minor liturgical rule set off an economic chain reaction that would reshape landscapes, boost international trade, and even influence the design of sacred spaces. The reasoning behind the beeswax mandate was both spiritual and sensory. Tallow candles sputtered, dripped, and filled churches with a greasy odor considered unfit for holy ceremonies. Beeswax, by contrast, burned clean and bright, its honeyed fragrance symbolizing purity. But this purity came at a price. Beeswax cost up to 10 times more than tallow, placing an enormous burden on parishes. The solution: monasteries and enterprising farmers turned apiculture into big business. Monasteries became hubs of beekeeping innovation, designing elaborate skeps-woven hives, and carefully managing flower-rich meadows to boost production. Suddenly, beekeeping wasn't just a side activity. It was a sacred industry, with every hive's output directly tied to a church's ability to properly venerate its saints. Trade routes blossomed around this golden commodity. Northern Europe's forests, rich in honeybee habitats, became economic powerhouses, shipping wax down river to cathedral cities. Venice grew wealthy, importing wax from the Balkans and Crimea, processing it into graded cakes for different ecclesiastical clients. The wax trade even influenced geopolitics. When the Teutonic Knights conquered Prussia, they didn't just seek land, they secured some of Europe's richest beekeeping regions. Wax became so valuable that forgers would mix it with resin or even paint tallow candles white to pass inspection, prompting the first anti-adulteration laws for religious goods. Beyond economics, the wax decree left its mark on art and architecture. Beeswax's clean burn allowed for intricate poly chandeliers, massive circular candle holders suspended from church ceilings, without fear of dripping wax damaging precious frescoes below. The demand for whiter, purer wax also spurred beekeeping techniques that increased yields, indirectly supporting medieval medicine through honey production. Even the liturgical calendar adapted. Candlemas, the February festival blessing candles for the year, became a de facto harvest festival for beekeepers, marking the start of preparations for spring swarms. The most poetic legacy, though, lies in the symbolism. Medieval theologians saw bees as divine creatures, their hive hierarchy mirroring celestial order, their wax-producing labor echoing spiritual industry. By mandating beeswax, the church didn't just light its altars, it enshrined an entire world where faith, nature, and commerce were inseparable. Today, when we see beeswax candles in cathedrals or Orthodox icons, we're witnessing more than tradition. We're seeing the flickering afterlife of a decree that turned humble beekeepers into unsung pillars of medieval spirituality. The clatter of spoons and murmured blessings were the only sounds permitted in medieval monastery dining halls, where silence wasn't just encouraged, it was holy law. Monastic rules demanded meals be taken in quiet contemplation, a practice that might seem severe today but revolutionized European dining customs in ways we still feel. This silent meal decree wasn't about punishment, it was spiritual engineering. By removing chatter, monks believed they could better focus on gratitude and divine connection, turning every bite into a meditation. What began as a religious discipline, however, would soon escape cloister walls and redefine what it meant to eat civilized. Noble households, always eager to mimic the perceived refinement of religious orders, adopted the practice with a twist. While monasteries used silence to cultivate humility, aristocrats weaponized it to showcase superiority. Elaborate sign languages developed among servants, a raised finger for more wine, a tapped knife for bread, allowing meals to proceed without vulgar verbal requests. The most powerful families took pride in hosting entire banquets where guests communicated through subtle gestures, turning dining into a theatrical display of restraint. This performative silence trickled down to the emerging middle class, who saw it as a marker of upward mobility. Suddenly, teaching children to hold their tongue at table became a cornerstone of education, planting the seeds of modern table manners. The silent meal's legacy hides in plain sight, that unspoken rule about not talking with your mouth full, a secular remnant of monastic discipline, the concept of dinner conversation as a structured art rather than free-for-all chatter. A compromise between religious silence and Renaissance sociability. Even our fork etiquette owes a debt to these quiet refectories without the distraction of talk. Monks perfected precise eating techniques that nobles later copied to avoid appearing slovenly. The most ironic twist, today's high-end restaurants boasting quiet dining rooms are unknowingly reviving a 700-year-old trend, proving that some rules never vanish. They just wait for the right moment to return. Beyond etiquette, this decree reshaped sensory experiences. When words vanished, other senses sharpened. Monastic cooks developed complex spice blends and textures to compensate for the lack of dinner talk, birthing Europe's first mindful eating movement. Manuscripts from the period describe monks detecting subtle herb infusions or bread quality with heightened awareness, a precursor to modern gastronomy's focus on flavor nuance. The silent meal, intended to curb gluttony, accidentally elevated cuisine to an art form by forcing eaters to truly notice their food. Perhaps the most profound impact was psychological. In a world where most gatherings were raucous affairs, these structured meals created islands of calm, early prototypes of what we now call quality time. Families who adopted moderated dinner speech found it fostered deeper bonds than drunken feasts. a revelation that echoes in today's screen-free table policies. The next time you pause mid-bite to listen rather than speak, you're participating in an ancient tradition that transformed nourishment into something far richer than sustenance, a silent communion bridging the sacred and everyday. The rhythmic clang of hammers striking anvils might sound picturesque to us now, but for medieval Londoners trying to sleep, it was a nightly nightmare. City officials, inundated with complaints about sleep-deprived citizens, took drastic action. They banned blacksmiths from working after dark. What seemed like a simple quality of life measure quietly revolutionized how entire cities organized time, labor, and even neighborhood layouts. Before the decree, the blacksmith's forge never cooled. Armor needed repairs at all hours, horses required emergency shoeing, and merchants demanded last-minute tools for dawn departures. The night shift wasn't just common, it was essential, but when the hammering stopped after sunset, something unexpected happened, a domino effect that standardized work hours across trades. Bakers adjusted their pre-dawn routines since they no longer competed with midnight metalwork. Tanners, who relied on blacksmiths for specialized knives, shifted their own schedules to daylight. Gradually, the entire city synced to a shared rhythm of daytime labor and nighttime rest, laying groundwork for the modern 9-to-5 concept. The ban also reshaped urban geography. Noisy industries like barrel making and cartwrighting clustered together in newly designated daylight districts, while residential areas expanded into formerly undesirable plots near abandoned nighttime forges. This zoning by sound created the first proto-industrial parks, separating work and home life in ways that still influence city planning today. Even street design adapted. Wider lanes muffled the daytime din of concentrated workshops, while cobblestones replaced dirt to reduce the rumble of cartwheels. Beyond practicality, the decree changed how people experienced their cities. Nighttime transformed from a time of scattered industry into something approaching quiet, allowing the first real distinction between nightlife and daylife. The sounds that remained watchmen's calls, the occasional tavern song, became markers of community rather than chaos. Modern noise ordinances, from construction curfews to muffler laws, trace their lineage back to those medieval smiths forced to put down their hammers at dusk. Perhaps the most poetic legacy lies in what replaced the midnight clatter. As forges fell silent, other nighttime sounds emerged. The scratch of scholars' quills, the murmur of bedtime stories, even the first tentative notes of amateur musicians no longer drowned out by anvils. In trying to control noise, medieval lawmakers accidentally made space for creativity, proving that sometimes the sweetest melodies grow in the silence left by missing hammers. The thundering charge of a medieval knight depended on one crucial factor: the sheer size of his warhorse. In 1284, King Edward I of England issued a decree that would echo through stables for centuries. No warhorse could stand shorter than 14 hands high, roughly 56 inches at the shoulder. What seemed like a straightforward military requirement sparked an agricultural revolution, transforming humble farm horses into living siege engines and reshaping equine genetics across Europe. Breeders faced an unprecedented challenge. Meeting the height requirement meant selectively pairing the tallest stallions with the strongest mares, often importing massive horses from Flanders and Friesland at great expense. The resulting destriers, medieval tanks weighing over 1,500 pounds, could carry armored knights with ease, their broad backs serving as mobile battle platforms. But this selective breeding had unintended consequences beyond the battlefield. Farmers noticed these towering horses could pull heavier plows, leading to deeper furrows and better crop yields. The same traits that made a horse formidable in combat, powerful hindquarters, dense bone structure also made it invaluable for clearing dense forestland, accelerating the expansion of arable acreage across the continent. The ripple effects extended to trade and transportation. Larger horses meant wagons could carry more goods, reducing the number of trips needed between markets. Towns along breeding routes flourished, with specialized fairs emerging to showcase these equine giants. The Shire and Clydesdale breeds we know today owe their existence to those medieval height mandates. Their ancestors carefully selected not for gentle temperament or beauty, but for their ability to meet a royal yardstick. Even the iconic image of a knight in shining armor depends on this decree. Without those towering destriers, the full plate armor of the late Middle Ages would have been impossible to maneuver effectively. Perhaps the most surprising legacy lies in veterinary science. The push for taller horses led to meticulous record-keeping of bloodlines, creating Europe's first systematic studbooks. Breeders observed how certain traits passed through generations, laying groundwork for modern genetics. And when the age of cavalry faded, these gentle giants found new purpose, their strength repurposed for pulling brewery wagons or working English farmlands, their stature a living monument to a time when a kingdom's might was measured in hands high. So the next time you see a draft horse in a parade or pasture, remember its impressive frame isn't just a product of nature, but of medieval military policy, proving that sometimes the most enduring weapons are those that never draw blood. The village green lay eerily quiet on Midsummer's Eve, not by tradition but by decree. When medieval lords banned peasant dances, they weren't just outlawing entertainment, they were trying to dismantle the very heartbeat of rural life. These gatherings, where farmers and laborers spun and stomped to pipes and drums, had always been more than mere revelry. They were living newspapers where gossip traveled, matchmaking happened, and grievances simmered, a fact that made authorities deeply uneasy. A 1530s proclamation from Saxony warned that overlong dancing leads to idleness, lewdness, and sedition, exposing the real fear behind the bans, that twirling skirts and stomping boots might spark something far more dangerous than sore feet. What the nobility failed to anticipate was the creativity of defiance. When public squares fell silent, dancers simply moved to hidden clearings in the woods or barns with muffled instruments. The very act of going underground transformed these gatherings, making them more precious and potent. Secret dance locations became guarded community knowledge, with watchmen posted to whistle warnings at approaching officials. Musicians swapped loud shawms for quieter fiddles, inadvertently creating more intimate musical styles. Some of the most iconic folk dances, like the Swiss Ländler or English Morris dances, owe their distinctive steps to these cramped, concealed performances, where elaborate footwork evolved to fit smaller spaces. The bands also forged unexpected alliances. Wealthy freeholders, normally aloof from peasant life, often turned a blind eye to dances happening on their land. Some even hosted them discreetly, recognizing their value in maintaining morale during lean years. Church authorities found themselves caught between enforcing the decrees and preserving traditions tied to saints' days, leading to wink and nod compromises where dances were rebranded as religious processions with suspiciously rhythmic pacing. This cultural tug-of-war birthed hybrid festivities that still survive today, like Portugal's Politeiros, where dancers perform with sticks said to symbolize biblical weapons, masking martial arts-infused moves beneath a veneer of piety. Beyond preservation, the repression reshaped the dances themselves. Without official oversight, regional variations flourished wildly. A step band in one county might resurface 3 valleys over with new embellishments, creating rich localized traditions. The need for secrecy also bred symbolic gestures still recognizable in folk dance, elaborate handkerchief waves that once signaled approaching guards, or sudden silences mid-tune that originally helped evade detection. Even the circular formations common in European folk dances served a practical purpose. Dancers could quickly scatter in all directions if interrupted. The most enduring legacy of these bands lies in what they reveal about cultural resilience. Every time a German Schuhplattler slaps his lederhosen or a French beret line twists through a village festival, they're performing centuries of quiet resistance. Those medieval lords, convinced they could legislate joy into submission, never imagined their decrees would become fertilizer for traditions deeper and more vibrant than before. Today's folk revival movements, from Celtic ceilidhs to Balkan circle dances, carry forward an unbroken chain of memory, proof that when power tries to silence celebration, the human spirit simply finds new rhythms. Frederick II of Sicily didn't just want saffron in his treasury, he wanted to choke its very roots. In 1231, the Holy Roman Emperor declared a royal monopoly on the crimson threads, turning a humble spice into the medieval equivalent of gold bullion. At first glance, the move seemed purely financial. Saffron was worth its weight in silver, and controlling its trade meant filling war chests for his endless campaigns. But Frederick's decree did more than fund battles. It weaponized flavor, transforming kitchens into extensions of his political will. Harvesting saffron was grueling work. 75,000 crocus flowers yielded just 1 pound of usable threads. By cornering the market, Frederick didn't just inflate prices. He created artificial scarcity so extreme that counterfeiters risked execution for selling dyed corn silk as the real thing. Suddenly, a pinch of saffron in your risotto wasn't just seasoning. It was a billboard announcing your loyalty or connections to the crown. Chefs in royal courts competed to weave it into ever more ostentatious dishes. Gilded breads, golden custards, even saffron-infused wines so vivid they glowed like liquid sunlight. The spice became a culinary shorthand for power, its presence at banquets signaling favor and its absence whispering exclusion. Yet the monopoly's unintended consequences were even spicier. Black markets flourished along alpine passes, where smugglers sewed threads into hollowed-out walking sticks or hid them in wax-sealed letters. These saffron undergrounds birthed Europe's first food fraud detectives, taste testers employed by cities to verify purity. The scarcity also sparked innovation. Chefs in Venice and Genoa, cut off from Sicilian supplies, began experimenting with turmeric and marigolds, accidentally diversifying medieval spice racks. Even the language of luxury shifted when Frederick's agents intercepted a shipment bound for rival Milan. The term saffron treason entered the lexicon, describing any black market gourmet rebellion. The most enduring legacy, though, was cultural. Frederick's monopoly fused saffron's identity with exclusivity so thoroughly that centuries later, Renaissance painters would grind it into pigments for royal portraits, knowing its very hue screamed nobility. Modern haute cuisine still treats saffron as the ultimate flex, from Spanish paella to Swedish lussecata buns, a living heirloom of medieval power plays. Every time a chef measures those precious threads today, they're reenacting a 13th century-old drama where flavor wasn't just tasted but wielded. Frederick proved that controlling what people crave is more potent than any sword, and that true power lingers longest not in treaties or crowns, but in the lingering aftertaste of a spice-laced bite. The church bells rang out over medieval towns not just to call the faithful to prayer, but to enforce one of history's most transformative pauses, the Sunday silence. What began as a religious mandate to honor the Sabbath quietly reshaped the rhythm of human labor, carving out the first protected day of rest in an era when work never truly stopped. From the moment Charlemagne decreed in 802 that Sundays were for worship alone, this weekly hush became more than spiritual discipline. It was a radical interruption of the feudal grind, a fleeting taste of freedom for peasants who otherwise toiled from dawn to dusk without reprieve. At first glance, the rules seemed purely pious: no ploughing, no market stalls, no blacksmith's hammer disturbing the peace, but the effects rippled far beyond church walls. For the first time, serfs had legal grounds to refuse labor 1 day a week, creating a fragile but revolutionary precedent. Lords who flouted the ban risked fines or even public penance, forcing manors to halt operations completely. This weekly pause didn't just refresh bodies, it reshaped minds. With time to gather beyond their master's watch, villagers exchanged news, planned petitions, and most dangerously, realized their collective power. Historians trace the first stirrings of medieval labor movements to these quiet Sundays, when whispered grievances coalesced into demands for fairer treatment. The silence also birthed unexpected cultural shifts. Without work to structure the day, communities filled the void with storytelling, music, and games, laying foundations for weekend leisure traditions we still recognize. Bakeries, forbidden from selling fresh bread on Sundays, developed sweet treats like brioche that could be baked the day before, inadvertently inventing weekend indulgences. Even nature responded to the rhythm. Fields left fallow 1 day in 7 showed higher yields, teaching farmers the value of rest long before modern agronomy confirmed it. But the law's greatest legacy was philosophical. By codifying rest as a right rather than a privilege, Sunday silence planted the seed that would grow into modern labor laws. When 19th century reformers fought for the weekend, they didn't cite factory conditions alone. They pointed to those medieval parchments proving societies had once valued pause over profit. Today's debates over work-life balance and digital detachment unknowingly echo those ancient decrees, proving that some interruptions aren't just pauses, they're the quiet revolutions that redefine how we live. A pilgrim's journey across medieval Europe wasn't just a spiritual quest, it was an economic lifeline for countless towns along the way. When kings like Louis VII of France decreed bridge toll exemptions for travelers bearing pilgrim badges, they weren't just doing charity, they were strategically funneling foot traffic through their territories. These exemptions transformed rickety wooden bridges into bustling funnels of commerce, where every sandal-clad traveler represented potential profit for taverns, blacksmiths, and relic sellers. What began as a pious gesture quietly rewrote the rules of medieval tourism, turning sacred routes into the superhighways of their day. The financial alchemy was simple but brilliant. Without tolls to pay, pilgrims could spend their coins on hot meals, sturdy shoes, or commemorative lead badges from shrines, each purchase pumping silver into local economies. Bridge towns flourished as way stations, their inns expanding to accommodate the constant stream of weary travelers. Enterprising bakers developed long-lasting pilgrim loaves, while cobblers perfected sandals with soles thick enough for 1,000-mile treks. Even the bridges themselves evolved, widening to handle the traffic, and sprouting chapels where travelers could pray and leave donations before crossing. The most successful routes became self-perpetuating cycles. More pilgrims meant better infrastructure, which attracted even more pilgrims, creating Europe's first version of a tourist economy. Beyond commerce, these toll exemptions became unexpected engines of cultural exchange. A German monk heading to Santiago might share new brewing techniques with a French innkeeper, while Italian pilgrims introduced Mediterranean spices to northern kitchens. Songs, stories, and even architectural styles hitched rides along these routes, creating a pan-European cultural language visible in everything from cathedral designs to folk tales. The exemption decrees also forced standardization. Pilgrim badges had to be verifiable to prevent fraud, leading to intricate designs that functioned as medieval passports. Some towns even developed early quality controls, with inspectors verifying badges to prevent freeloaders from exploiting the system, the most fascinating unintended consequence. The birth of travel infrastructure. Safe passage for pilgrims meant kings had to police routes against bandits, leading to the first organized highway patrols. Monasteries along popular paths expanded their guest houses into proto-hotels, complete with multilingual monks serving as translators. Detailed guidebooks like the 12th century Codex Calixtinus emerged, offering pilgrims tips on everything from avoiding dishonest innkeepers to treating blisters, a medieval lonely planet that still survives today. Perhaps the decree's greatest legacy was its demonstration of soft power. By welcoming pilgrims, rulers positioned their domains as enlightened and prosperous, a magnet for both devotion and deniers. The roads worn smooth by millions of footsteps became physical evidence of a kingdom's importance, while the stories travelers carried home turned local saints into international celebrities. Modern tourism boards promoting heritage trails or tax-free shopping districts are unknowingly channeling those medieval kings, proving that sometimes the most effective way to fill your coffers isn't by charging tolls, but by removing them. Snow piled high against the cottages, and the chill in the air wasn't just winter's bite, it was the gnawing fear of running out of firewood. In medieval Europe, where a single frosty night could mean death for the elderly or infants, the penalty for stealing firewood was brutal: lose a hand, or in some regions, face public flogging. These laws weren't just about protecting property, they were desperate attempts to maintain order during the cruelest months, when a single stolen log could mean the difference between a lord's comfort and a peasant's survival. Yet court records tell a surprising story. Judges often dismissed cases, neighbors forgot to testify, and bailiffs mysteriously looked the other way when a starving family was caught with an extra bundle of kindling. This quiet conspiracy of mercy reveals the messy heart of medieval justice, where written codes collided with unwritten humanity. The law's severity made sense on parchment. Firewood was a finite resource, and without draconian deterrents, forests could be stripped bare before midwinter. Nobles argued that harsh punishments protected the community's collective survival. If one family stole, others would freeze. But the reality was more nuanced. Villagers understood that desperation didn't equate to wickedness. A mother stealing wood to keep her children warm wasn't a criminal, she was a neighbor. Local juries, often composed of the accused's peers, routinely acquitted or reduced sentences, citing necessity as justification. Some communities even developed covert systems: secret wood piles left in remote clearings, or church alms distributed as gifts rather than stolen goods. These silent acts of defiance transformed theft into a moral gray area where survival trumped statute. The tension between law and compassion reshaped legal traditions in unexpected ways. Judges began recognizing extreme need as a mitigating factor, planting early seeds for modern legal concepts like duress or necessity defenses. The firewood dilemma also exposed class divides. While a poor farmer might lose a hand for taking fallen branches, wealthy landowners routinely illegally cleared communal forests without consequence. This hypocrisy fueled resentment that would later erupt in peasant revolts, where demands for fair access to firewood featured alongside calls for lower taxes and an end to serfdom. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of these harsh decrees lies in what they reveal about community bonds. When the law demanded cruelty, ordinary people chose kindness, creating an unspoken safety net that no royal edict could unravel. Today's debates over petty theft during economic crises, whether it's food from markets or blankets from stores, echo those medieval winters, asking the same timeless question: when survival is at stake, can any law truly be just? The answer, it seems, was written not in ink, but in the silent understanding between freezing neighbors, passing a hidden bundle of sticks beneath the cover of night. From regulating bread to banning beards, these 23 decrees reveal how royal whims didn't just govern medieval life. They seeped into the cracks of everyday existence, bending society in ways no one could have predicted. Some laws, like the English longbow mandate, reshaped nations, while others, like the doomed cat leash law, collapsed under the weight of their own absurdity. But whether they succeeded or failed, each decree left behind fingerprints we can still trace today, in our food, our fashion, even our sleep patterns. What's truly remarkable isn't just the laws themselves, but how people responded to them. Faced with unreasonable rules, medieval minds didn't simply comply or rebel, they innovated. They turned beard taxes into fashion statements, transformed cheese regulations into culinary art, and weaponized hat laws as silent class warfare. These stories remind us that history isn't just shaped by kings and queens, it's forged in the quiet resistance and clever adaptations of ordinary people. And the echoes linger, that Friday fish tradition, a relic of Henry VIII's naval ambitions, the stained glass glowing in cathedrals, partly funded by Beeswax decrees that turned beekeeping into big business. Even our modern workweek owes a debt to medieval Sunday silence laws that carved out the first protected day of rest. The past isn't just something we study, it's something we live, often without realizing it. So the next time you pass a bakery and see perfectly uniform loaves, or watch a border collie herd sheep with precision, take a moment to appreciate the hidden history behind it. These aren't just quirks of the modern world, they're the afterlife of royal experiments, accidental heirlooms passed down through centuries. Which decree surprised you the most? Was it the dancing plague bans, the goose herding loopholes, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts below. We'd love to hear which piece of medieval madness stuck with you. And if you enjoyed this journey through history's strangest laws, don't forget to subscribe for more tales where the past isn't just prologue, it's downright peculiar.